Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel. My name is Scott Carey. I'm the editor-in-chief here at Lead Dev, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for this session. I'm just going to let a few of you come in. I can see a few of you are in the waiting room, so thank you for being on time. Hoping we get a really good turnout for this session. So for anyone who can't remember what you signed up for, today's panel is really digging into a piece of research that we just completed here at Lead Dev and along with our partners at Harness, which was called the State of AI-Driven Software Releases Report. You'll actually find that in Zoom, there is a resources tab at the bottom. You might have to click on the three buttons for more, but I've actually included the full report in there for any of you to download so that you don't have to give us your details and so that you can have a look into the findings as we go through this session. I've got two brilliant panelists here today to really dig into some of the findings. But in terms of the kind of main headlines, we really found that it was clear that there is just a huge amount of more volume of code being produced at organizations across the industry. But what hasn't kept pace is how we release that code. And so we really wanted to try and put some numbers behind that kind of feeling that there's all these kind of lagging processes and tools behind this kind of wave of like AI-driven velocity that we're seeing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes. After which myself and the panelists will head over to the Lead Dev Slack, where there is a panel Q&A channel where we'll be answering any questions that get left over or just carrying on the discussion if you want to meet us there. So let's introduce our panel because they're the most important people for today. So I'm going to start with you, Claire. Claire, how are you doing today?
Doing very well, thank you, Scott. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Director of Engineering at NA10 at the moment, although am, depending on how much AI tooling I'm using, an engineer. I have spent the last decade, though, wrangling people rather than bits. I'm leading the enterprise engineering function at NA10, so still doing that mix of strategic, but also seeing some real-world things around AI in the real software lifecycle. So reading this report, which we got an early sneak peek of, was very interesting, and I'm looking forward to discussing it with my other panelist here, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So my name is Aaron Newcomb, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Harness. I've been working on this report with Scott. Glad to be on the call as well with Claire. She's helped us in the past and always appreciate her insight and, also appreciate what N8N is doing because we use that internally as well. It's a great tool. So just a little plug for you there.
Thank you very much.
But no, glad to be on the panel today and really glad to be talking about this topic. Some interesting findings and I think a unique take. There's a lot of AI reports out there trying to dissect what's going on with AI these days. But this is really one of the first ones that I know about that actually tries to tackle what happens as you're releasing code. A lot of them focus on code development or deployment or those types of things that happen before it gets out into the wild. But okay, now let's take a look and see how do things change once your code needs to be released into the real world and what should you do? And so I think it's just a really interesting report from that angle.
Yeah, I think with most things, AI, like the timing can feel really difficult. It can be like this moves so fast. So I was really happy actually to see that a lot of the things that we were kind of discussing in the report became kind of real big topics of conversation around the same time. I was talking to you, Aaron, the other day about how like the code review as a bottleneck just has become really, really apparent all of a sudden. I'm sure lots of you folks have been feeling it for a while, but it feels like the conversation around that has kind of really dialed itself up to 10 recently. And we've got some findings in here that kind of back that up. But yeah, that kind of sense that that wave of kind of enthusiasm for what AI can do in terms of pushing more code has kind of hit the reality now of like how we actually get that out into the world. So I'm really happy that we did this with you folks. It's been really fun kind of working out how we wanted to attack this topic. And I think we got some good stuff. just for anyone who hasn't looked at the report yet, which is totally understandable because we only published it yesterday, we got 400 responses in total. And what the research really showed us is that there's a clear divide between organizations that are starting to rethink the way they release code, including really importantly, including the guardrails that they put in place on that side, and then organizations who have recognized the need to like completely rethink those processes. And we'll talk a little bit about that divide in here as well. And just to kind of set the context as well, I just wanted to pull out a couple of kind of key stats. One of the ones that kind of really jumped out at me when I was writing the report is that 57% of organizations still use human in the loop review for every line of AI generated code. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, it doesn't matter how much you modernize the code generation part. Most organizations still want a human to see that code before it goes into production. And that doesn't feel like it's changing anytime soon, but something is going to have to give there. And then 29% are spending more time on code review than before. So again, that kind of bottleneck is kind of appearing in all sorts of places in this report. And then the one that I remember, Aaron, you kind of pointing out when we first sat down to look at the report was like only 49% of organizations have specific guardrails in place for AI generated code. So most organizations haven't actually changed anything about how they set up guardrails for AI generated code entering the code base, getting released into the real world. And that feels scary to me. And maybe we can kind of unpack those fears on this call.
Yeah.
So those those are the bits I wanted to pick out. But yeah, Aaron, first off, like when you first sat down to read this report and start to dig into the numbers, what really jumped out at you?
Yeah, definitely. It was that lack of guardrails really kind of surprised me. You could say 49%. It depends on where you're coming from, where you're sitting right now, right? With your use of AI, the amount of code that you're generating with AI, how you're going to feel about this one. But the reason that only 49% of people have implemented guardrails is something that surprises me, is because it seems like we just went through this whole process over the past 10 years with the software development lifecycle changing, the DevOps movement, and we said, no, it's a life cycle, and you get the little infinity loop, right? And it's like, yeah, we need all of these pieces to be in place in order for this to work correctly so that we can get out of doing the waterfall approach or whatever, right? And it seems like with the rush to AI, we've forgotten about some of those things. We've forgotten about how important testing and QA is. And, it's not just unit testing in your code. It's actually running experiments and testing it in the real world matters as well, because if you're not doing that, then you don't know what the correct, whether the code that you're changing actually is having the effect that you want, especially when you're writing code that affects end users. You could have unintended consequences. And that's what happens when you don't have guardrails in place, right? So I think for me, that was the biggest shock, is that people aren't looking at considering this as a complete life cycle anymore. It seems like they're really focused on those early stages of code development and not so much code deployment.
Yeah, Claire, how about you?
I think for me, it was nice to see some corroboration of the data that we're seeing internally, just because, again, it's always nice to get some validation that you're not an outlier or you're doing something really weirdly wrong or right or whatever. So yes, we're definitely seeing reviews taking time and PR sizes increasing, and we'll maybe dig into that in a bit more. But the one thing that really made me go, wow, was the fact that there's a significant proportion of people think that the quality is improving. I'm not saying I'm seeing that in the day job, and I'm also not seeing that in a lot of the social stuff that I see. So I'm really interested in the data behind that one.
Yeah, I thought that one kind of really jumped out. I thought it was just like really like pertinent as well at the moment. Like, I don't know if either of you saw the story a couple of weeks ago where Amazon had a couple of kind of notable outages that were kind of put down to not directly to like AI coding tools, but the presence of AI coding tools definitely contributed. And they ended up like basically doing an all hands meeting where it was like okay, we need to rethink the guardrails here. We need to think about the quality of what we're putting out and not kind of get over enamored by the velocity part of it. Are either of you kind of seeing that kind of slight rebalancing? Obviously, the genie's out of the bottle, but that slight rebalancing of expectations there.
I do think it's the worst case scenario, not saying for Amazon, but for any company, right? Is that if you don't have, and that's the reason I come back to these guardrails is, if you don't have policies in place, let's say, which say you can't, an AI agent can't delete code, for example, or can't delete data, right? That would be a policy that I would want to put in place right away. I think one of the things that happened with Amazon from the public reporting that I've seen is that an agent went and deleted files because it wanted to restart, like, hey, let's restart this development process. I'm going to delete all these files, and in the process deleted a bunch of orders or something. Again, I'm not an expert in exactly what happened, but you are seeing those stories again and again where, because if you had just put in some simple policies, right, and had a procedure or had a human in the loop at some point. I'm not saying you'll always have to have humans in the loop, or maybe that task will get lighter in the future. But for today, with where we're at right now, especially, you need to have those things in place. And I think something like that could have been an easy way to avoid some of those problems that I've seen in the reporting so far on Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cautionary tale, and someone has to be a cautionary tale. So
yeah,
it's just
that's right.
Yeah, and I think as well, I mean, obviously lead dev has always been about the people management side of things, but I feel strongly that at least right now, and I can't say for 5 years' time because I do think the whole SDLC will change over that period of time. But getting rid of lots of engineers too early or too quickly is also a cautionary tale, because we still need that judgment. And you can have the most processes in the world, and things still slip through the net because they're only put in place because the humans have put that judgment there. And if the right people aren't there to have the right judgment, and who's bringing the juniors along, the usual things that we have already talked about in other lead dev panels, I think all of that played into the situation there.
Yeah, and let's talk about that kind of human in the loop part of it. Obviously, the report found that like most organizations are still relying on human in the loop to ensure that this new kind of type of code is compliant, is doing what it should be doing, is not breaking things. But to me, like, and Claire, you're alluding maybe there to some of the layoffs that have been kind of happening in certain pockets of the industry that have been kind of put down to AI as well, in that there's more code being generated, not just in volume, but also in size. We can see that clearly in the report itself. But there's, at least if there's not the same amount of people doing it, there's maybe less in terms of review. So like something's got to give there.
Yeah.
And it just feels like to me like we are currently kind of stuck in that mode of, okay, well, it's everything needs to be reviewed by a human, but like, is that sustainable? Is my very long-winded question.
I don't believe so. No, not at the speed that we're going. But this is where, again, I think the software development lifecycle will change. We've put a lot of effort, well, maybe not us, maybe the foundation model companies have put a lot of effort into the code gen. There's a lot of training data. It can be what is correct, at least in does it compile and run, is a known quantity. The AI can run its own loops to figure that bit out, even if it isn't quite so good on the requirements necessarily. But we haven't invested in the next steps. What does it make to have AI to really assist with the reviewing? I mean, we are running several tools at NA10 that look at specifically for reviewing, but we still have humans because we don't yet trust these tools. What does it mean to have the AI deploy this stuff? I think there's huge gaps there. My SRE teams are definitely still feeling the pain and are not getting the speed ups and the gains, if you like, that the same size teams are getting when they're doing product development and feature development. So there's a lot I think we need to look at to be able to truly reduce the number of humans. Whereas now what I see is that it's creating almost more burden in the short term.
Yeah, there's definitely certain parts of the industry that are kind of that pain is being pushed onto. Like you read these stories of how like enthusiastic developers are about all the stuff they can do with agents now, but then there's the less enthusiastic SRE teams who are like, oh my god, like I'm absolutely buried right now. And they haven't seen that same kind of impact yet. And I do think, I think to your point, it's coming. Like there's going to be some form of solution there. But yeah, for the time being, like they are really kind of caught in the crosshairs there.
Yeah.
Aaron, I know that Arna spent a lot of time thinking about everything after code gen. What do you think about that kind of sustainability of that necessary review step into the future?
Yeah, I think I'm in total agreement with what you're saying. I think that from my perspective, the human in the loop equation is changing, right? So it's obviously you're going to have people that understand the code and can review that more quickly. So you're going to need less people reviewing in the short term as we get more comfortable and the tools get better. You'll still need people there though, right? Or as Claire said, as things evolve, better processes to take the place of those humans in the loop. You know, one of the ways we see our customers dealing with this is by using feature flags, actually, right? So if you make sure that your AI agents are always putting things behind a feature flag, then when you release your code, and let's say everything's off by default, right? Everything should basically look the same at that point. But it also gives you the flexibility for an incident response team as you turn those feature flags on and these new features take effect. If something goes terribly wrong, you're always going to have an incident response team. Maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll be a group of agents that's doing incident response. But somebody has to have the ability to turn those features off if they go awry or open up some sort of security problem, right? For people, all of a sudden, you're listing credit cards on your website or something. Like somebody needs to be able to go in and say, whoops, that's wrong. Let's turn that off. And so, feature flags and experimentation are going to become a big part of that, I think, because it's a simple way to, when something does go wrong, you can just turn it off quickly and deal with it right then.
Yeah, Claire, we talked about this a week or so ago, but like, how important do you think like a lot of the progressive delivery kind of principles that Aaron's talking about there become in this kind of new era?
I personally have found them very valuable for the nearly the last decade, but again, I have to stop and remember that I've been lucky enough to work at companies that were progressive, no pun intended. So I think they're vital for moving at speed, whether that be humans in the past, because I worked in companies that did ship regularly and many times a day of big code bases, or whether that's agents. And I think this is going to be an interesting leveler or lack thereof if people don't adopt this. I think it's important to decouple releases from launches, as it were, which is exactly what Aaron was saying, is like put it live behind a feature flag, then we can turn it on for a launch. Having opt-ins rather than opt-outs. Cautionary tales on a few things that have gone out this week about whether we should be opting in and opting out in general. I think, your segments, your dog fooding internally, all of those standard things that we've all read about, perhaps if we've read any of the progressive delivery stuff, I think are really important. I think engineers that are working in companies where they're still debating whether to even use cloud or not are going to be left quite behind, not just from an AI tooling point of view, but all of this progressive delivery. I think it all becomes part of what you need to do. So that would be something that I think from a career point of view, it's worth folks considering. But I think as well, you need to be able to limit that blast radius. And I learned that very effectively at GitHub with the way they use feature flags back in the day. I mean, we had, again, to Aaron's point about the testing and the quality, we used to run the whole monolith test suites with all of the flags on. So what was going to conflict, and then subsets of them on and things like that. And very few people have got that kind of rigor. And I think we need to get there for more and more companies, honestly.
Yeah, I find myself kind of constantly coming back to that Dora report last year about AI being an amplifier for good and bad. And it feels like here that is kind of really pertinent. Like if you had good, robust, progressive delivery principles in place, that is going to help you really ride this wave. I was reading a post by the VP of engineering at Augment the other day, and he was talking about kind of how he's trying to set up his organization to ride this wave of AI generated coding, and it's a really difficult kind of needle to thread, because like you only have to be a little bit behind to be constantly trying to play catch up. And I think with this wave of change, like a lot of people feel that they feel like they're kind of constantly trying to catch up to the rest. But if you do kind of catch that wave, you're going to see everyone kind of really benefit from that. Um, Aaron, where are you on the kind of importance of progressive delivery here?
I mean, I think it's critical, right? And I think you can see it in if you look at the types of companies, I can see this from inside our organization anyway with our customers, the ones who are a little bit more ahead of the curve here in doing progressive delivery and setting up the processes that are needed. Because what you don't want to do is cause additional toil, right, with these processes. Because take feature flags, for example. I mean, you set up a feature flag, you test it. Somebody needs to go in, whether it's AI or human, and take that feature flag back out when you want to make that particular change permanent, right? So you can have a lot of tech debt. And this is actually an area where AI can actually help as well, right? So AI can take a look at is this feature flag, let's say, for in this case, still enabled, right, or still in use or not? And if not, here's a pull request to take that feature flag out. Like AI can already do all those things. It can see where it lives in the code. It can edit the code. It can take it out of the code, and it can propose the change and have it all ready for you. All you have to do is just make sure that, yep, that looks right. Go ahead and do the commit, right? So I think that I think that progressive delivery is the right way to go. And I think that that could be driven by AI just as well as it could be by humans in most cases. There are certain things where you're going to want a human still, but yeah.
Yeah, I think progressive delivery is one of the few kind of existing engineering paradigms that kind of really holds up here. But I definitely am starting to kind of feel like a lot of the others are like the cracks are starting to show. Like I think that the most obvious example is just like how do you run very traditional kind of agile or scrum kind of processes when you start bringing agents into the mix. I think that is very difficult, and I think it starts to collapse under the weight there. And so we're going to see like a lot of change. We're going to see a lot of what is considered industry best practice or kind of really standard way of doing things kind of break down here. And I think that, like, Claire, someone in your position who's obviously like running an engineering department, like, do you start to have to rethink like all the component parts of the software development lifecycle, or is that just like too extreme? Do you have to just kind of find the areas where you can make an impact and kind of ride that wave, as I mentioned earlier?
I don't think it's too extreme to push all of the boundaries, but it's what's the thought experiment versus what you actually do right now for
Mm.
me. So I've had a really fascinating conversation actually with our CEO Jan a couple of weeks ago when I happened to be in Berlin about like what does it look like in a year or 2 years time where the bottleneck isn't the PRs and we've got agents doing the reviewing. And we had it was a really fun conversation because we took it to extremes. Now, how I would roll that out, if you said to me, you've got to roll that out tomorrow, I honestly don't have a good answer. But I think we're going to feel that way there because I think what I thought a year ago about code gen is not what I think now. Aaron and I were chatting before we got started officially about this, that the tooling back then I used to think was magical, and now I look back and think well, it's quite poor compared to how it is now even.
Mm.
So I'm against the premature optimization of process as much as I am of code. So let's not try and make the best thing now, but like go, okay, the bottleneck is reviews. What can we do? So we're, for example, bringing in a couple of tools that do specific sorts of reviews of code. One of them's a security scan, and one of them's a different kind of. You can set your own quality metrics and you can set it up how you want for your definition of quality. So we're trying that now. I've seen some good stuff from them and some nitpicky stuff. And again, so I think that's a good step forward on the code thing, but around other things, do we need to build skills? Do we need to influence the code gen tools more? Do we? Yeah, I mean, we're doing some experiments with what can we do in the cloud space, but we're not building tooling. That's not our core business at NA10. We're not selling that. So I don't think we're going to push that to extremes. We're just doing it to make our own cloud operations slightly nicer in the short term. So I think it's try some things out, experiment, ride the different tool waves as they come out and be prepared to experiment and try things, but be again very conscious that in 2-3 years, who knows what this looked like? Because to your point about sprints and Scrum and things, I read something just last week and I'm blanking on the name of the article now, but it was like, is there any point in sprints anymore when an agent
Mm.
can do an entire sprint in a day? What is the new measurement? What do we need to think about there? So I don't
It
think,
breaks down under the pressure. Yeah.
yeah, we don't have good answers yet, but I think being willing to experiment and try, I think will get you further forward than those that are clinging on to the old ways still.
Yeah, there's plenty of that around. Like I read a piece the other day about where, like, what can we get rid of code review? And like, it's extreme and it gets clicks, but it's people are having these conversations. People are like pushing those boundaries because something has arrived here that is making everyone kind of rethink the real fundamentals of it. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting time to be in the industry for sure.
Yeah, and I'm not convinced that we're quite at the point of write once code and then we just regen it all the time. I think that's wasteful and we can't guarantee things. And we need to guarantee things even in just coding space, never mind finance and nuclear reactors and the usual suspects.
Yeah.
But I do think humans needing to understand to the depth they've always had to understand probably will shift over time, much like we're not coding in assembler anymore, for example.
Yeah, I think like just taking a step back, like just in the report itself, like one of the first questions we asked people just to try and get a baseline kind of understanding of where everyone who was responding is at. We asked them like, how much of your newly generated code is AI assisted? And even that finding really surprised me because if you read the news, you got CEOs from Spotify, especially from Anthropic and OpenAI, basically saying, "Oh, our developers don't write any code anymore." And maybe they're telling the truth, but I thought it was interesting in our report that like only 4% of respondents said that 75% or more of their new code is AI generated. So that's only the new stuff. And so like we're not at that point yet where like all code is being written with agentic help or even with coding assistant help. And that just kind of like it reminds you of like the size and shape of the industry. Like there are organizations, as you said earlier, who are still thinking about migrating to the cloud. And so, this is a big shift and it's kind of not evenly distributed, but it is going to have an impact for sure. I wanted to talk a little bit more about guardrails because like I found this kind of fascinating, just the kind of like general kind of lack of them or the general lack of kind of evolution on the guardrail side was definitely kind of stand out to me in the report itself. But then when we kind of like dug into like what are we actually talking about guardrails, it got even more kind of interesting to me that we picked out a few in the questions itself of like just vulnerability scanning, output determinism, so testing to ensure that the code is behaving consistently across environments, context verification, so make sure that the agent hasn't introduced any logic that's going to break things, IP or data privacy regulations. Obviously, that's going to be unevenly distributed amongst organizations that are more heavily regulated. But when we broke that down by company size, it kind of really changed. So the big organizations were doing vulnerability detection at almost kind of half the respondents level. And so the smaller organizations feel, to me, much more comfortable with this new kind of vibe coding paradigm of, yeah, let's just like, let's get it out there, let's iterate, and then if something breaks, we can roll it back because there's less at stake. But I don't know, are either of you seeing a kind of clear divide between the startups and the enterprise here when it comes to like that caution and that kind of ability to kind of adapt to this new way of building and releasing software? I'm going to
I
go
can go
Aaron first, just because you got maybe a little bit more context outside of the four walls.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely true. I mean, there's more at stake with big enterprises, right? They have, if you think about, data leaks, for example, we've all gotten those letters. Oh, your data was exposed, and we're going to offer you some sort of identity protection thing for a while because we screwed up, right? There's just more at stake with larger enterprise customers. It's not to say that they're moving slowly, though. We don't see that. We see larger enterprises moving quickly, but they are more concerned about guardrails than maybe a smaller company would be. That's the trend that we're seeing. And they have more experience in doing it, right? Maybe they've been through a few times where they've had to clean up after something went wrong. And they also have more experience just in implementing guardrails and running things like experiments, right? They may have a dedicated experiment lead or a team that's used to running experiments to validate that things are working or not, running tests to make sure that things are secure. Whereas the smaller companies just aren't quite there yet, right? They just haven't grown up to that point. Sometimes that's a good thing in terms of speed and velocity. When you're a small company, you can move very quickly because of that. But there's also, of course, the potential that everything goes off the rails.
I think for me, it's as well, having been in various size companies over my career and seen different things around not just risk, the obvious risk appetite and regulations and so forth, but it's also like the amount of existing code. AI can work with existing code. I'm not one of these that says it only works on greenfield, but how you work with it is different, I find. And changes come with more risk because there's more surface area, just generally, whether that's humans or agents. And so that's a factor for me. Given I end up talking with a bunch of enterprise customers in my current role, I'm actually quite fascinated by how fast some of them are picking up the AI and agent side of things compared to how slow the original cloud adoption was. I think as well that there's the founder thing here as well, because of what's in the presses, and especially if you have non-technical founders. So again, it's great that everybody can be a developer or be closer to a developer now, but what it takes to run something safely in production is still foreign to a lot of founders that are not from a technical background. And they maybe don't want to listen to technical experts or fractional CTOs or whoever's helping them because, again, of all of this stuff they're reading about. I shipped 15 companies in 3 hours, Twitter threads and things like that. So I think that can also lead to a divide there. And if you've never had to go through SOC 2 compliance, or you're not aware of the upcoming European cybercrime regulations and things like this, you're just going to be like, who cares? Except that a lot of people do care quite a lot.
There's so many interesting threads to pull on in what you just said, Claire. Like, the amount of code that a large enterprise has compared to a small company is interesting. It's also what AI is really good at doing. But then also when you peel that back, we also are dealing with context windows, right? So if you have a huge code base, how many times do you want to be putting that, referencing that or querying against that with your AI tools? Because every time you do that, that's tons and tons of tokens that you're using. And so it becomes quite expensive. There's, impacts to the environment. There's like so many threads you can pull on there with the amount of code that you need to do. But, there's positive and negatives. One positive I see, and I think you mentioned this earlier, is with code review, and, finding security vulnerabilities and things like that. There was a story, I think in Axios, I think Anthropic pushed this out when they did their Opus 4.6 release, where they threw it against a bunch of open source software and found like 500 previously undiscovered vulnerabilities, right? And they were touting this, and everyone's like, "Wow, that's amazing!" And I think that's an example of a huge code base. I don't know how many projects they analyzed, but it was a very, very large amount of code. And they were able to find all these vulnerabilities. Now, whether those vulnerabilities were real or perceived, maybe they would never come. I don't know what the review was on those, but I'm just saying, like, there's just so many interesting threads that we need to pull on when we consider having AI do this work versus having humans do this work.
Yeah, and it's like sometimes there's somebody that's been in the industry a long time, you sort of sit down and go, what about X, Y, and Z? And then somebody that's less experienced is like, why did you ask those questions? And sometimes you're like, I don't even know.
Right. Because I always ask those questions.
Yeah. So it's like, how do you encode that for the team? How do you educate the AI as well as junior developers? So
Yep.
Well, you have to win the argument to hire junior developers.
Well, there is that one, yeah.
I've only got a couple more questions for the panel, but I do want to remind everyone that you can ask questions. There is a Q&A button. It might be hidden behind the more button on your Zoom client there. But yeah, please do ask any questions about what we've been talking about or about the report, and we'll try and get to them. Otherwise, we'll get to them on Slack later. But yeah, Claire, we talked a little bit, we touched on the kind of quality element here earlier, and I thought it was interesting in the report that kind of broadly speaking, most organizations felt that the introduction of AI improved the quality of their software. And that definitely jumped out at me. And I think like anecdotally, you were saying that you do have like loud voices in engineering departments almost probably everywhere where they're just kind of really focused on the bad, where they're focused on the slop or the I'm really interested at the moment in the impact that AI code generation is having on the open source community, like the way that maintainers now are getting buried
Oh
with really
yes.
poor quality code. And so yeah, I wonder what was your kind of takeaway on that finding and how it kind of resonated with your experience.
I don't think I've ever judged it as harshly as some people. I would definitely class myself as an engineer that wanted to solve problems versus I need to write the most perfect code. So I
Mm,
haven't had quite the mental transition that some engineers are having with this feeling the craft is going away. Um, but it can make mistakes, and if you don't know to push it or ask the right questions or get it to fix whatever the thing is, depending on the context, then those mistakes will get put into code. I I know what you mean as well because parts of NA10 are open code licenses. We get so much stuff that we can't handle, and yet we haven't even got it bad compared to a lot of people out there. I've got a lot of friends who are open source maintainers, and it's just getting very silly now.
mm,
There's also people closing down their bug bounties because there's so
yeah.
much automated stuff going in there. And I mean, we've certainly seen an uptick in our own one on that. And many of them are just like, oh, come on, this is like theoretically exploitable if you self-hosted it in a really insecure way, which
Hmm.
your self-hosting is only down to you. And you're just like, it just is a drain. I would love to see the quality improvements. I would love to be in a position to say, okay, here's a bunch of paper cuts in linear. I have a coding agent pick through those and push them out and make it look better for the customer. That would be an amazing win in terms of quality. But I don't feel that maturity wise, very many people are actually there yet, unless it's a hobby project, honestly.
Yeah, I spoke to a guy called James Garrett. There's a video on YouTube of me talking to him on the Lead Dev channel a few months ago, and that was one of his big projects when he first got his hands on these tools. Was how do I pick all of the things from the bottom of our backlog, the
Yep.
paper cuts, the things that never get done, and like let's see how effective the agent can be at like churning its way through them. And he was pretty happy. You know, it definitely made a marked improvement. So maybe that's where people are seeing the quality improvement in just those kind of small things that never get done, rather
Yep.
than the big things that are big and hairy and scary. Um, that's the problem with these reports sometimes, Aaron. We were talking about it the other day. It depends. It depends, doesn't it? What do you mean by
Right.
quality? And so like you have to kind of try and work out what the data is saying as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there are a lot. I use AI on a daily basis. I've got OpenClaw set up, and I'm working on a couple of projects with it. I think we are hitting this inflection point, though, right? It's like we trust AI to do all those small little things that we were talking about, right? Like, yeah, go update all my variables names to this, or check my code and make sure that things are linked correctly and they're working, or I have a unit test set up for this. Yeah, we kind of trust it to do that, and I think that's good. But we all have to remember that we're very quickly, speaking of OpenCloud, moving towards an agentic world, right? With agentic workflows. And so you have less visibility. And so it's almost, especially in the beginning of where we're at, like for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, I don't know how long, we're
Hmm.
almost going to need more oversight in that area because we're opening up, we're giving more permissions to agents to go do things. And so there needs to be visibility and guardrails. Anybody that's ever either vibe coded or especially worked with OpenClaw, where OpenClaw can go in and do pull requests and manage your GitHub repos on its own, will know that it does make mistakes. And if you don't, every time I tell OpenClaw to do something, I say, check with me before you do this. Tell me what you're going to do and check with me before you do it. And, 90% of the time it's fine. But that 10%, I know that it was going off on a tangent it didn't need to. And I said, no, 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 no. Let's pull it back and work on this other thing that we started with, right? So it's almost as if as we go forward, we need folks to be so AI savvy at this point, right? We need the oversight of a real person at this point still to know, yes, this is working correctly. This is where I want to go. This is where I want to take it. Or no, we need to pull back. We need to start over. We need to reconfigure things to work the way that I know that they need, the way I know they need to work.
Nice. All right, we are nearly at time, and so I'm going to ask, we haven't had any audience questions, so this is your last chance, but I'm going to ask the question that I always ask at the end of these panels, which is, considering all that we've learned, from this report and during this conversation, what would be your parting piece of advice to any engineering leaders out there who are maybe going through this similar transition? I'll start with you, Claire.
I think at the leadership level, don't try and process the hell out of it yet. You need guardrails. Very much agree with Aaron. Guardrails good. Too much process. We don't know what's optimal yet, and the tools are changing so fast. You can spend too long trying to get the perfect setup, at which point everything's changed. In terms of educating your engineering teams and engineers, there's two things. One is that you need to be embracing this as a tool because it isn't going away. I understand that can cause conflicting emotions, but it's not just your current company. It's like all of the companies are now adopting this as become another tool in our tool set. And I think the key one for me is the ownership and accountability at engineering or any contributor level. Like, yes, anybody can now write a PR and can contribute when they might not have been able to the code base. But if you do that, it's this DevOps mindset again of you own it, you ship it. Sorry, you write it, you ship it, you own it. So that CodeGen is just the very first tiny part of the whole software development lifecycle. The maintenance and operational burden of that software is a whole other thing. So make sure that your engineers know that AI is just a tool, certainly at this point in time, and you need to have ownership and accountability yourself as an individual. So don't just go, hey, I did it, throw it over the wall and run away, because that will also hurt you.
Oh, it's coming. It's coming for a lot of us.
Yeah.
Aaron, how about you?
Yeah, I would say picking up from there, make sure that I think progressive delivery is more important than it's ever been. It was always important. It was always a great way to do things. Now there's more of an urgency around getting progressive delivery set up correctly, with checks, with things like feature flags that you can turn off easily in case things do go wrong. I mean, it just eliminates, if you think about it from either the practitioner level or from the leadership level, right? Leadership wants to avoid risk. They want to make sure they have governance. They want to make sure they can audit things, right? Especially if you're in a regulated environment. And then at the practitioner level, obviously, you want your code to work. And if it doesn't work, you want to be able to turn it off and fix things quickly without a lot of toil in the process. And I think that progressive delivery is a good answer to both of those concerns.
Nice. Perfect. Was that just an agree there, Claire?
Yeah, it wasn't. I was just agreeing. Yes.
Perfect.
Huge
Well, that's a good place to stop. Let's stop on perfect agreement. We are at time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in live, or for any of you that watch this on demand. I hope that you get the chance to dig into the full report that I included here, but is also on the homepage of leaddev.com at the moment. We will almost certainly be emailing it to you if you signed up for this as well. Please do send us any feedback if there's anything in there that kind of really stood out. I thought it was a really great report, and I want to thank Harness for supporting it. And yeah, thank you, Claire and Aaron, for jumping on today and sharing your thoughts.
No, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right.
Glad
See everyone. See everyone later. Thank you so much. Bye bye.